Poso, Sekoli, Sutton King, Noctau, Pinuki, Nugats Ungwa Hawaii, Ni'i, Waknata, Nawakitolota, Oniota Agani'i. Hello, relatives. My English name is Sutton King, and my Menominee name is Noctau Pinuki, which means comes first woman. I shared in the Oneida language that I am part of the Turtle Clan and I'm people of the Standing Stone. I am the co-founder and president and co-director of the Urban Indigenous Collective. I moved to New York City when I was 18 years old to pursue my degree in psychology. And for me, growing up in Wisconsin, having a grandmother who's enrolled in the United Nation of Wisconsin, I was able to access healthcare at no cost from Indian Health Service. And that was really important for me to be able to have culturally tailored, accessible, free healthcare, which was not something that existed when I moved here to New York City. When we look at the landscape of IHS and the ITU system, which is IHS, tribally run healthcare organizations, and urban Indian health programs, we see a lack of funding in terms of what is available for urban Native people. And so in New York City and along the Eastern Seaboard, what we see is 1 to 2% of IHS's budget going to urban spaces, which creates a limiting capacity for programs that do exist within New York City and again along the Eastern Seaboard. So for me, one of my first questions when I moved to New York was, where is IHS? And the closest accessible intertribal healthcare clinic is about 4 hours away. So I grew up, you know, having that free healthcare and then coming to New York City and recognizing the stark contrast that exists for urban Native people. So I think that was one of the larger challenges that I had to navigate and saw a real gap in need. But what I did find, excuse me, what I did find, which was really supportive for me in my own identity, being Afro-Indigenous, having a mother who's Native and white and a father who's Black, there are not many Afro-Indigenous peoples in Wisconsin. Yes, we do exist, right? But the term Afro-Indigenous was not as common as it is in a place like New York City. And so for me to first hear that identity as Afro-Indigenous, I was a teenager when I heard that and I moved here and it was revolutionary for me. Before moving to Wisconsin, I would just say, well, I'm Black, Native, and white. Really didn't know how to identify. And I kind of felt like I had to choose one or the other. And I always felt like I'm not Black enough for the Black folks. I'm not Native enough for the Native folks. And I'm sure as hell not white enough for the white people. So like, where do I fit in this? Like this race, right? And the social construct. But then again, moving here and meeting other Afro-Indigenous people and really seeing that more visibly helped me to feel more confident in myself and my place and my connection to belongingness. So there's two things I really was seeing, right? The lack of healthcare accessibility, but then this identity that represented me and my experience. What motivated me to establish the Urban Indigenous Collective was this stark contrast and need for culturally tailored health and wellness services for urban natives, right? Really identifying a gap. Coming to New York City at a very young age and needing accessible healthcare. I myself have a chronic health condition, and having care really will support my ability to continue doing the work that I do as an activist. And so really recognizing that gap and being, an activist, being in the culturally tailored, space for Native programming for at probably around 5 years at that time, I really saw just the limited capacity that the current programs had. As someone who's a formerly director of an urban Indian health program here, I had really a deep understanding of what existed and what didn't exist, right? And really wanted to understand how we could support an organization that was willing to take those steps to really provide direct services, primary care, really ensure that comprehensive healthcare was accessible for urban natives living in New York City, understanding that we have one of the largest populations of urban natives, right, in the country. Outside of that, something that I really recognize, formally at an urban Indian health program was the federal definition of what it means to be an urban Indian, right? And how divisive that truly is, and how that really is rooted in colonial policies and assimilation policies of blood quantum. And so, what was so difficult for me at that time was having different community members come into the space and tell them, sorry, we don't see you, or this organization doesn't see you as valid. Your identity isn't valid. You're going to have to go somewhere else. That didn't feel good for me, someone who is Afro-Indigenous, someone who sees all of my Indigenous relatives as kin, someone who does not respect colonial borders, and someone who certainly does not respect blood quantum policies that are designed to erase us. So there felt to be a cognitive dissonance for me in what I said that I believe in and what I was actively supporting in our community. And so I think for UIC, one, the goal is to be able to be one day that full comprehensive healthcare agency that can provide inpatient, outpatient, right? Be a research institute, but furthermore, really be a space that is not divisive and recognizes all of our Indigenous relatives and is a safe space for Indigenous peoples, whether they were born in their territories on their reservations, or they were born in urban spaces, whether they were raised more traditional or they are on a path of reconnecting. I think it's important that we create a space that unites all Indigenous peoples to do this work that we're doing. We're going to need the collective to be a part of it. So I think community-based participatory research is important because it really is centering consultation, consent, co-creation, and in turn data sovereignty. And I think when we really were ready to launch the Urban Indigenous Collective, what we did was we had something that was so invaluable, which was our community-based needs assessment. And that community-based needs assessment was the first time that our community was really being directly asked about their health and wellness needs and priorities. And for us to be able to bring in community voice creates sustainability and creates an organization that is additive, right? Really being able to use that consultation as a pathway to inform the programming of the Urban Indigenous Collective creates an organization that is truly built within community voice, right? It's not based on our own assumptions. Even if we are urban natives ourselves and are a part of this community ourselves, you never want to create a community grassroots organization based on your own assumptions, right? So constantly having that feedback loop of community-based participatory research creates, right, that communication, it creates trust, and then it allows you to really be able to step up in a way that has longevity for your community. UIC affirms Afro-Indigenous identity by decolonizing their definition of what it means to be an urban native, right? And so I think, as I shared before, really not respecting these colonial policies or tools of assimilation, or rather tools of erasure. So really being able to support, Afro-Indigenous peoples in their own activism, their own identity, right? Their own voices, being able to lift up that identity rather than be a space that creates division based on these very old, dated policies that were never meant to support um, our voices, our existence, and to really be able to, again, create a space for all Indigenous peoples, regardless of, if they're this much of a pie. Yeah, I think about my father's side of the family who comes from Alabama. My grandfather worked in Africa Town for over 40 years in the paper mill, and Africa Town was this and is this beautiful town where those who were enslaved were able to create a community to really honor their African ancestry despite being forcibly removed, and kidnapped to so-called United States. and how they were able to, as Nigerians, really just relic in their ancestry and their traditions and their connections and keep those alive despite the forced removal and attempted assimilation and colonization they were experiencing, the sheer just utter violence that they went through. Just being able to stay connected to culture just reminds me of the resilience of the Black ancestry that I come from, right? And then similarly to the Indigenous ancestry, right? Understanding just so many different activists within my ancestry that have come before me and their ability to ensure that the Menominee people, right, were able to stay on our ancestral land where our creation story started, right? And our connection to our forest and how that forest provides us with medicine and strength and so many teachings, right? And so I see, my identity as an Afro-Indigenous person as revolutionary, right? As I think about my ancestors and what they had to sacrifice for me to be where I am today, and the deep responsibility I have of cultural perpetuity, which is this understanding that one day I may not be here. I will not be here. That's a circle of life. But I do have a responsibility to ensure that the future generations recognize the importance of their ancestry, both Black and Native, those teachings that come from those lineages and how resilient and truly survivors we are, right? And so I feel deep, incredible gratitude for my ancestry. And I feel so empowered by my ability to use a voice that was attempted to be suppressed and oppressed for so many centuries. And so I think, yeah, I'm really thankful to be both Black, Native. A Afro-Indigenous leader that I really look up to and has taught me so much and has also been a true sister to me in this movement is Shanae Bullock, who's Shinnecock. And she has really been just a sister to me in this fight and someone that I can go to uh, holding so much and be able to, get off that phone call or leave that room and feel so heard and so seen and so supported. And, she was one of the first Afro-Indigenous women I really deeply connected with and was really able to build a sisterhood with. And it's so important in this work because you do deal with a lot of lateral violence. It's a part of the work, as a leader, and to be able to have someone who has been on this journey for a very long time and also so rooted deeply in her traditions and with her deep knowledge of plant medicines and herbalism is so important, especially when we're considering, how we re-indigenize and decolonize healthcare. So she's just really someone that I trust, that I learn from, that I laugh with, that I cry with, and is really someone that is doing a lot of amazing work and great things for her people and our people globally.